Thank you, Jim, and good morning to all of you. I'm going to talk to you a little bit this morning about what the CAC does. I use acronyms, and I get scolded for it by my husband all the time because he said, everybody doesn't know what those acronyms are. So I will try to do my best to explain those. The CAC is the Compliance Assurance Committee, and we are directed, and our mission is to promote effective oversight of compliance with professional standards by CPAs and their firms. And basically what our committee does is we are the NASBA arm that works with the peer review board on certain issues. They will call and say, you know, we're looking at making some changes. How do you think this is going to be received by the state boards of accountancy? So we then go back with our committee and we try to talk about it and give the direction that we believe state boards would want us to be giving the peer review board in their process of making changes. I want to introduce our committee. It's a very hard-working committee. We've had a very busy year this year. When I call your name, if you would stand, and if we could hold applause until all are introduced, I would appreciate that. Fred Briggs, Jimmy Burks, Jim Giroux, who you've already seen this morning, Mark Hobbs, Henry Crossstitch, Alan Long, Mike McClure, Art Sparks, Laura Walker could not be here, and Jeremy Watson. And that completes our committee. So I want to thank you all for your service. And these guys work, I mean, this year we've had some, we try to keep conference calls to an hour because it's really difficult when you get on a conference call and there's 10 or 11 people and we're all pretty strong personalities. We all have our ideas of how things ought to be handled. And we've had a couple of conference calls this year that were over 2 hours. And that may not sound like a lot, but when you're on the phone, it's tough. We've had some tough issues this year, and I'll kind of talk to you a little bit about those issues. What we've done this year in the Compliance Assurance Committee, we responded to 2 exposure drafts and 1 concept paper. And when I say we responded, NASBA has a committee called the Regulatory Response Committee. And a decision was made several years ago that all responses should come through that committee. That way we are assured that one voice will speak for the state boards and hopefully will give the opinion that the majority of state boards might represent. And so if you have a committee issuing a letter and you have a regulatory response committee issuing a letter and maybe another committee, we might get different perspectives and we don't want to send that message. We want to send one message. So what we do is we meet and we go through the papers, and this is true in any NASBA committee, and we provide our comments to the Regulatory Response Committee. They then invite sometimes myself and maybe other committee members. Sometimes the regional directors are involved, and that is the way responses are developed from NASBA to the various organizations that we are responding to. Excuse me. This year we responded or assisted in responding to the exposure draft from the peer review board regarding preparation services. We felt there were approximately 13 or 14 states that if the peer review board had gone forward in the manner in which they were exposing, could have created some issues for state boards because of the way their rules or statute read regarding SARS engagements. So we responded to that. We also responded to the engagement audit quality issues paper. And then lastly, we responded to the practice monitoring of the future paper. Those of you that were at our regional meetings saw that a short video about the peer review of the future and heard some presentations on that. But we did respond to that. And when Jim Bracken speaks, you're going to hear him make some comments that some of the changes that have been brought about through the AICPA Peer Review Board are some recommendations that from our committee and the Regulatory Response Committee, they actually have incorporated. So I believe the Compliance Assurance Committee has a voice that is heard, and you know, we want to make sure that we are heard. At each conference call, we receive reports from Alan Long. Alan is the regulatory representative on the peer review board, and as a result of that, sits on our committee. Alan was on the state board in Kentucky, and I'm not sure how long he served, but he is a great asset to our committee, and I believe he is a great asset to the peer review board, representing the regulatory bodies. Then we have, at each committee meeting, we hear a report from Art Sparks and Mark Hobbs. Sometimes one or the other speaks, sometimes they both speak, but they are both hold seats on the National Peer Review Committee. Companies who are oversighted by the PCAOB, firms that are oversighted by the PCAOB, and other firms that choose to be oversighted by the National Peer Review Committee. They are not going through an administering entity like a state society or the New England Peer Review Committee. They actually go through a different process. And so, because they're not in a state, our committee does a review of the activities that Mark and Art participate in, and they give us very good feedback on what's going on the NPRC. They are voting members of the NPRC, so they're not just there to listen like many RABs are. They are actually participating in panels. They are participating in selection and approval of peer review processes at that level. So we are very fortunate to have those three individuals on our committee. We also issued our annual report on the oversight of the NPRC. That oversight report is provided to state boards to give them some assurance that the NPRC is operating in the manner in which it should be from an administrative standpoint. That report is based on the information that is provided to us by Mark and Art, and also we review the NPRC's report that is prepared either by them or a third party. We also this year issued some failed report guidance. If you have not seen this guidance, you need to get it. It's very good, it's guidance. We understand on the Compliance Assurance Committee that various state laws are different, that some states are prohibited from seeing peer review reports. Some states are prohibited from opening an enforcement case because of a peer review report. So we all have different rules. But this is some very good guidance if your committee, your peer review oversight committee can issue those kinds of reports. If they can send them, recommend sending them to enforcement, it's some good guidance. It is on the PROC on the NASBA website under PROC, P-R-O-C. You will hear it called PROC. You will hear it called PROC. It's the Peer Review Oversight Committee. There is a page on the NASBA website, and this guidance, that's where you'll find it. You will also find it on the Enforcement Committee's website. At NASBA, we really work Many of our committees overlap. We work together to try to make sure that things are happening the way they should. So that information is also on the Enforcement Committee's webpage. We also obviously had many discussions this year on the summit, planning this day for your attendance and hoping to provide you with really good speakers and good information. We hope you will all take something home. You are going to hear some things today more than once. I know that I've read some studies, and I know from my perspective, sometimes I have to hear things 2 or 3 times before it gets stuck in this head. So you may hear some repetitive things today. That's done somewhat with an intent, because the things that you're going to hear repeated are some things that we all feel very passionate about and we think you all need to be aware of. So, as you can see, we have had a very busy year on the Compliance Assurance Committee this year. We have stayed very, very busy all year long. We've had some conference calls that we had to schedule in a very short time frame, and I appreciate all the committee members giving their time because they're all busy practitioners or they have jobs in industry, and so NASBA is not their paying job, so I appreciate all of their time. So we had our annual face-to-face meeting yesterday. We also, yesterday, had a half-day meeting with the AICPA Peer Review Board Oversight Task Force. And I don't have all the names, but I do want to introduce Anita Ford. Anita, where are you? Anita is the current... Thank you. Anita is the current chair of the peer review board, and Anita, you're going to be here till maybe noonish, and so if you want to bend her ear, I know she will be glad to listen. She can't promise you that she'll change things because she's one person. She and I had a very interesting conversation walking back last night about a couple of issues we're both very passionate about, but you know, sometimes you can be very passionate about an issue, but there are just roadblocks. Sometimes you can't get things changed, kind of like your legislators and things that we have to go through as regulators. Sometimes we know really the right thing that needs to happen and we want it to happen, but sometimes those guys or gals just have a different understanding and we don't get exactly what we want. So it's the same way with serving on any committee or board that you serve on. So what are we going to do next year? That was kind of the question yesterday morning with the committee. And one suggestion was, well, we've really worked hard this year. Maybe we should take a year off. Well, that isn't going to happen. I asked Ed Barnicott, who is the individual at NASBA that kind of heads up strategic planning and that sort of thing, to come down and talk to us. I am also serving this year on the Strategic Planning Committee for NASBA, and we're planning out for 3, 5, 10 years. What should NASBA be looking like in the future? So we had our first meeting, and it was very clear there are 4 board members, NASBA board members. There are, I believe, 2 or 4 executive directors from boards. There are 4 outside just state board members and then 4 NASBA staff. And we recently met in Nashville and talked about all the issues facing the profession and how it would affect regulation and what should NASBA be doing. And there were 2 issues that came right to the top of the list. And can you guess what those issues might be? Audit quality was number 1, and number 2 was peer review. And of course, those go hand in hand, and guess what? That's what our committee does. So I don't think we're going to get a year off. So we talked about some things that we might be doing in the next year, and I'll just give you a little taste. One is, we really need to work on getting peer review oversight committees in every state. not just a named committee, but an active committee, doing a job that they need to be doing, and that is oversighting the administration of their, if it's their state society or another entity, that they know that that program is working. There are mechanisms to where you can have individuals that attend the RAB meetings, so they hear firsthand the discussions that are going on in those RABs to know whether they are fair, that we don't have a good old boy network. And I can assure you, I sat on those RABs for 12 years, and the times when I sat on them, there was not that situation. But sometimes we get complacent, and we just need, boards need to know that's happening in their state. We need to continue to provide information to you all about facilitated state board access. Facilitated state board access is very important for state boards. Jim is going to be talking to you a little bit this morning about, you know, some letters that you're going to be getting at state board level that are going to be letting you know that something has changed perhaps on a peer review. And if you've got facilitated state board access, you're going to be able to go right there and look, and you're going to be able to see what changed. That there was basically that letter is saying to you, state board, there was probably a problem with this review, and something's changed. Without facilitated state board access, you may not have the ability to find that out right then. So it's very important that you have facilitated state board access if your state statutes and rules permit you to do that. It also, facilitated state board access allows you to see those reports on firms that are passed with deficiency and fail. And if you have an active PROC, they should be seeing those reports. In Oklahoma, Texas, I know there's several other states, we don't give the option for a firm to, quote, opt out. They are required to have their report posted through facilitated state board access. So they don't have to send it to the PROC person at Oklahoma who happens to be here. He just goes online. He knows when the reports are due. He knows, I mean, it is a great tool for him to be able to use. We are also going to look at some education initiatives related to facilitated state board access to the boards. We are also going to be providing some guidance, perhaps, on licensing issues. Jim's going to talk a little bit about that. And sometimes we're hearing through their organization that sometimes a firm calls a state board and they have difficulty getting a positive or negative answer as to whether or not they need to get a license in that state. We know about individual mobility, but that's not firm mobility. And so a firm goes out, they're gonna go to, I'll use Texas, I'll pick on Texas for instance, because I'm in Oklahoma. And so I had a really unique situation. We had a client in their business office was in Oklahoma. So all of the records were in Oklahoma. They have 3 or 4 locations in Texas and they have 5 in Oklahoma, but the majority owner is a Texas resident. So I called Texas and it's really unique. I mean, the entity that we were auditing was really an entity combined of those 2 states. And the lady said, well, I really am not positive. I mean, it kind of sounds like you might. I said, if it kind of sounds that way, I'm getting a license. It was $50. It was very easy to do. I know some states have an application process and you have to wait, and that, Jim has shared with us, that creates some problems sometime. So as those of you that are here that are state board members or staff, we need to, from the regulatory side, be able to have someone that can answer those questions. And I know we can direct individuals to the rules and the statutes, and they ought to all be able to read them. But if there's some way that perhaps we could make that simpler, NASBA's going to be looking to see if perhaps we might add something as we have on mobility, that is a joint project between the AICPA and NASBA, to see if maybe we could work something like that to where we could get those to where it would be easier to get answers. We talked a lot about quality control standards in our meeting yesterday, and that we really believe there needs to be some education to firms. I don't know that that's a regulatory response, but if there's anything we can do to help assist in that, and I know the AICPA has already started an initiative working towards that. So I think we're going to have plenty to do in the next year that hopefully we'll be busy. Maybe we might not be quite as busy as we were this year. And of course, that's going to be dependent on what exposure drafts might come out of the peer review board. So we know there's probably going to be some continuing change. They are making changes, and Jim is going to be talking to you about some of those changes that have already happened. I don't know how much detail he's going to go into about what might be going to happen, but I have seen the Standards Task Force list of items that are on their plate. When I was getting ready for the regional presentations, I asked Jim to have his staff provide me, because I wanted to kind of talk about what might be on their plate. Oh my goodness, it was a laundry list. So I called back and I said, you know, I kind of need to know what, from a regulatory standpoint, might be, you know, that we might be most interested in, because no way we could talk about all of those items. It's a lot. So they have a lot on their plate. And so I know when that filters down and exposure drafts get issued, our committee will be addressing those. I have a couple of extra minutes, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have about our committee and our activities, if anyone has a question. Jim, I'm giving Jim, I wasn't going to tell him this last night because I know Jim really well, and whatever amount of time we give Jim, he will use it, and he will use it to give you all good information. But I have provided you with all of my wisdom on our committee, and I'm going to let Jim introduce Jim.